Welcome, everyone. Just going to give folks a few more minutes to come in the door and get started. Oh, I love our West Coasters. It's still morning for you all.
So we finally got winter in Vermont today.
Is it snowing?
We got a couple of inches. We're getting more this weekend, and it was 8 degrees when I left to go to the pool this morning. 8 degrees.
Well, Marissa says it's very sunny in the Southwest. All right, I think we've slowed down a bit for folks logging in. Oh my goodness.
Alaska. Do we have
Wow.
Is that AK is Alaska, right? Or is it's not Arkansas? Is it Arkansas?
Alaska.
It is Alaska. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, we're a little overwhelmed with snow. We've exhausted our snow days in school already.
Oh my
goodness. I've shoveled about 4.5 feet out of the yard.
Well, sit back and relax now. You deserve it. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Amy Friedlander. I am with Opportunities Exchange, and you will also be hearing from my colleague Sharon Easterling, who has prepared all of these awesome slides. We are so happy to have you joining us in this webinar today. It is the third 3 webinars that are really focused on educator compensation and recruitment and retention, really thinking about our workforce at such a critical time. NACCE has supported our work in this regard, and we had the pleasure of presenting at the recent national conference in DC that some of you may have had the opportunity to attend as well. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. We love the informality of Zoom as a meeting, but it does limit us to questions coming in through the chat. So if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Sharon and I will do our best to respond, but we also have set time aside, hopefully the last 15 to 20 minutes or so, for our discussion. Our colleague Louise Stoney couldn't be here for this portion of the meeting, but she will be joining us at the end of the webinar, so she too can chime in with her incredible knowledge and expertise as we all talk together about how we can really think creatively beyond wages and benefits to support our educators in the field. So this is what we've got on tap for this afternoon. Obviously, we've just had our welcome. And yes, we will be happy to share the slides and the recordings with you all as we have done with the other 2 webinars. So we're going to talk a little bit about, just some background and context. I think we all have seen all too many headlines about, what has been happening with the ECE workforce since COVID, during COVID, and also with our national teacher shortages. So we're going to try to synthesize some of that information for you all and tell you how we've been thinking about that information at Opportunities Exchange. We have some ideas around best practices for creating positive work environments, and really some, want to offer you what the national gurus say about giving educators the space and the supports that they need in order to be the most effective educators possible. and some nuts and bolts about how to really make that happen, particularly in light of the areas that we spend so much energy thinking about at Opportunities Exchange in terms of shared service alliances, family child care networks, and automation. And we always want to leave you with resources, tools, templates, and an open forum to have a discussion about what's worked in your community, what hasn't worked, what you're interested in trying, and all those other kinds of points of connection that we might be able to build. So that's what we've got ahead, and let's get started. So I'm not sure if you have seen the most recent data from NAEYC. This is just from last month. After surveying the field, we have nearly half of the programs that responded indicated that they are serving fewer children than they had been serving pre-pandemic. And for those programs that did indicate that they were serving fewer children, the vast majority, or 70% of those programs, explained the reason that their enrollment was lower was due to staffing shortages.
Amy, could you pause for just a second? It looks like, I don't know if this is something that Megan can help with. Meredith can help with, but it sounds like we've reached capacity, but we've had over 100 before. So we will try to work on that. Meredith, I wanted to make sure that you saw that note. Actually,
Yeah, I'll work on that right now.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
And we'll just, remind everybody that in the event that we can't solve this problem, because sometimes Zoom acts erratically, we are recording this and we'll share it with anyone who isn't able to get in if we can't solve it. But maybe we can get that fixed. So sorry, Amy. Carry on.
No worries. So the other bullet point here in terms of the NAEYC data collected was that those nearly half of the respondents who were new to the field, so had been employed in early childhood for 1 year or less, indicated that they are considering leaving the field. So while we might think, we are doing okay because we are recruiting new folks to the field, it doesn't seem as if we are finding folks or, offering the kind of workplace environment to those new educators that would retain them in the field.
And yes, that survey is available on the NAEYC website. So if you just go to naeyc.org, I believe there's a link to it right on the homepage, and you can read the whole report.
So one of the things that we've talked about, I know for those of you who were with us in one of our previous webinars where we talked about how to create a salary scale and the importance of creating one for your community and working with providers, directors, program directors, and family child care educators to think about implementation of salary scales. We talked about parity with K-12. But as we walk in this new world that we have, this moment in time where we have both a lot of money in the field and a severe staffing shortage, we really want to be cautious about using K-12 as our North Star. So we want to build on the ideas that are working, but we also want to be aware that there are real challenges with the K-12 workforce. So these are some recent data points. I'm sure you're reading similar headlines in your communities. Sharon pulled national data, but I know locally here in Philadelphia, we read all the time about teacher shortages, substitute teacher shortages in our K-12 system. So we know that, the enrollment in teacher preparation programs has fallen dramatically across the country. We have vacancies in our K-12 schools at the beginning of each school year. folks are leaving the field, 300,000 public teachers in the past 2 years or so. And now there's data about the highest burnout rate of all US professions being linked to K-12. So, I mean, I suppose that's good. ECE looks good in comparison, but it certainly does point to some challenges with the teaching profession in general. And it also suggests that while from our perspective in early childhood, we view the K-12 educators as being very well compensated with benefits and summers off, it does suggest that all is not rosy and that teachers in that system are looking and expecting more than compensation. So I wanted to turn for a second to kind of ground us in why we are offering these webinars and how critical this work is to Opportunities Exchange. And this is really our value proposition, our belief statement. And many of you have probably seen this before, but we wanted to share it with you today because we feel it really does bring together this webinar series. So we believe that every director deserves an administrative team, every teacher deserves pedagogical leadership, and that every child deserves a reflective teacher. And while it's possible that there might just be some fantastic teachers out there who practice their craft reflectively without a lot of support from the top down, we really direct our work to think about those top 2 bullets. And so you've heard us talk frequently, and we'll mention that again today, about how critical it is for a director of a program, the owner of a family child care program, to really get administrative support that they need, whether it's from a shared service alliance, whether it's from automation or both, really that they need to create time so that they can offer pedagogical leadership to their staff. And we really, the focus of our webinar today is on how critical pedagogical leadership is, what it is, and how we can really work together at a systems level and at a kind of business level to create the opportunity for that pedagogical leadership. So let's go to the next slide. And this, again, a slide that many of you who know us have seen this slide, but I think it bears repeating that we in our system in ECE, we kind of ask our directors to be both the pedagogical leaders and the business leaders. And it's very challenging for directors to find the time to do both of these big buckets of work and to do it effectively. And so, you know, the pedagogical leadership is critical, it's necessary, but in the midst of legal, HR, facility, financial, all these other matters, directors can leave their teachers kind of on their own. And so we want to take a few minutes to talk about how some of these critical pieces of automation and shared services can really take some of the burden of that business leadership off of the director and allow her to really focus on pedagogy and really retain that critical workforce that she's managed to recruit. So this is what kind of the seesaw of administration and education, right? So there are so many critical aspects of administration that sit in front of a director each and every day, each week, you know, each month, tasks that simply must be done in order to move the business forward. And, you know, whether it's subsidy, attendance, tuition, payroll, you know, all of this work must get done. And the good news is that business automation can support that work in getting done more quickly, more effectively, more accurately. So when we talk about business automation and its power, it really is in the service of reflective practice, engaging with families, instructional leadership, and classroom coaching. We really want to give directors that time back so that they can use it to really work effectively with the teachers that they employ. And, technology and business automation, there are many different systems and apps that can be used, different types of software that do different things. Primarily, we talk about a childcare management software system, and they are the most comprehensive. And although not any one system does everything yet, but there are so many key components that can be automated and can save time for a director so that she can spend more time in the classroom or supporting educators in other ways. So childcare management software systems can automate billing. Parents can pay through these systems. The systems themselves can reconcile accounts. They do a great job tracking attendance, can really support easy, efficient enrollment. They can store and manage documents. Parents can sign documents online through systems. More and more, we're seeing licensing entities across the country that are willing to take electronic signatures and to look for documentation within these systems, which is really exciting. So there's a whole host of functions, whether it's, compliance, licensing, quality improvement, financial, CACFP, food program, HR, and even dipping into the pedagogical side, supporting family engagement, family communication, extending the learning from the classroom into the home. These systems really offer a lot to directors and can help overall to create a more positive workforce for the educators. So this is another piece of the puzzle that we talk about a lot at Opportunities Exchange. And so while we know that directors can save time when they use automation, we also know that, in some cases, centers and family childcare providers, different programs, different businesses can join together and actually access experts centrally through that network hub so that they don't have to perform that work at all, right? So a director who may be part of an alliance, she may be able to depend on her network hub staff to create financial reports for her, or to complete a review of the HR manual each year, or to do some other kinds of routine administrative tasks. So the idea of a shared services alliance is really bringing together multiple businesses and creating a centralized, kind of standardized set of expertise. So that's the blue rectangle on the side, a kind of central staff, your headquarters for all kinds of assistance that you might need as a director of a standalone program. And when that happens for a director who's a part of an alliance, she finds herself with more time to devote to the pedagogical leadership that is so needed to create the work environment for her educators.
So let me jump in and start to move our attention to the solutions and the content of what we wanted to explore today with you around how we create positive work environments. But we wanted to think for just a second about all the non-monetary reasons that educators leave the field. We have such a critical issue around salary and benefits that we tend to talk exclusively about. That's why folks don't come into or stay working in early childhood settings. But there are other reasons why folks decide not to stay over the long term. And I know, this is a short beginning list, and I know that you all know this if you've spent any time in early childhood, but the lack of respect can be really, really overwhelming. I remember years ago in a Worthy Wage meeting, one of our teachers who had been meeting, we'd been meeting and talking for a couple of years, and she came to the meeting and said she had decided she needed to leave her program where she worked with 2-year-olds, and she loved working with very young children. But she had to move to a public school setting where she could actually earn enough money to start her own family. The thing that hurt her the most was her aunt sent a card saying, "Congratulations on getting your first job," because her aunt had never really viewed what she did in early childhood as a real teaching job. I feel teary just telling that story again after all this time, but there is a terrible lack of understanding and lack of respect about what we do. Another issue, and I think this is going to bubble up a lot more as we see a greater and greater trend toward pre-K in public schools, right? We're really seeing a lot of push down academics. We're seeing, folks wanting 3 and 4-year-olds to do a lot of drill and practice, sit at tables or desks, and do things that they shouldn't be expected to do. And that can be very disheartening for an early childhood educator who knows what's best for children. Somebody commented a minute ago in chat that yes, directors have all of these tasks to do. And as of late, they're also spending a lot of time in the classroom, right? Our programs are terribly understaffed. And what can make that so hard is that it increases the pressure on the staff who are left. Another big issue is the need accessing services for early intervention or other children and families who are in crisis or have special needs. Being able to access those resources and access them in a timely way is really critical, and not being able to do that can be really demoralizing and difficult. So this and many, many more reasons why folks leave the field. We talked, when we talked about salary scales and we talked about benefits, we referred a lot in those previous sessions to this unifying framework that comes out of the Power to the Profession effort that NAEYC led, but was really embraced by more than a dozen national organizations, really building consensus. And this statement is really critical because there was a lot of time and effort spent on defining what early childhood educators need to know and be able to do. But there was also a lot of attention paid to the issue of compensation and benefits. And as you'll see here from this quote, working conditions that promote the well-being, the autonomy, and the effectiveness of employees. And we're going to kind of explore what we mean by those terms. So as we think about what it is that we're trying to do in creating these positive work environments, we need to really find good sources of guidance. Where do we go to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve? I've just listed a few here, and we'll show you some examples. But there are lots of resources in the early childhood space around defining what creates a positive work environment, and also lots of resources to help us move in that direction. But I want to talk about three of them. I want to talk about model work standards for just a moment, national accreditation standards, and those documents are also helpful roadmaps for us. And then the standards for early childhood educators that are embedded in the unifying framework. So let's talk about each of those. So you may be familiar with the work that comes out of Berkeley, Margie Whitebook and Leah Austin and the team there at the Center for the Study of the Childcare Workforce. They've been diligently working on these issues around work settings for well over 30 years. And they've created these standards called model work standards. They have a version for centers and a version for home-based childcare for family childcare providers. And I've just kind of listed the topics and given you a flavor, but this is a live link. So when you get the document, when you get this PDF file, that will be a live link for you. So you can actually just go directly and check it out and read them for yourself. But they talk about the various ways in which programs can help teachers feel supported and be supported in their work. So those are the model work standards, a very helpful resource. Then we also have our accreditation standards. So within the NAEYC accreditation standards, we have Standard 6, which speaks specifically to the staff competencies, preparation, and support, and particularly those standards around staff support. And I've just posted here a screenshot to give you a flavor of what they speak to, of the issues that they address. So, in order to demonstrate that you have this supportive environment, for example, show or describe 2 or more examples of staff-related policies that promote a collaborative and inclusive organizational climate. This one's my favorite. Show the program's employee policies include information about staff planning time, right? It's a good reference document to begin to think about what it is that we're trying to accomplish. What are we trying to create here when we talk about creating a positive work environment? So in a similar way, the National Association of Family Child Care's accreditation standards also speak to work environment. And where you'll find most of those are in standard number 5, professional and business practices. And you can see here that the standards are under revision, and I've listed 2 of the new ones here, but you can see that that NAFCC really promotes provider well-being by encouraging and promoting the idea that providers will have policies and will have expectations about how they will act and be treated as a professional, and how they will have boundaries and limits and be able to operate their business in a professional way. So again, it's another resource document for us to think about as we're engaging in this work around creating positive work environments. And then this last set of standards, again, these come from the unifying framework. Now, I want to remind you that when we talked about compensation and we showed you the salary scale template, we had kind of normed that template to the different levels in the unifying framework. So we have educator level 1, 2, and 3. And in a similar way, so what that relates to are these standards. So this is the body of work that represents what the field, and again, NAEYC led the conversations, but these were embraced by all of the major national organizations in the early childhood sector. So I feel very, very comfortable and confident saying that this should be what we look to in trying to understand what it is that we're expecting educators to do. So we're raising compensation and we are basing it on credentials, but those credentials carry with them expectations around what it is that people know and what educators are able to do. And the reason I think this is so important for us to lift up in the framework of this conversation is because this is really the content of what we want our program leaders to be able to support teachers around, right? What is it that childcare center directors are trying to support teachers to be able to do? So we want to kind of hit a couple of bullet points that we think are essential as we're defining positive work environments. So we're going to talk for a few minutes, we're going to talk about the HR infrastructure in a program. What are the kind of policies and practices that programs need to have to fully support the staff, and what is it about those that will help people to feel like this is really a good place to work? We're going to talk for a few minutes about pedagogical leadership. What do we mean when we say that? What are the tasks that come under that kind of big, broad heading? And how does it help us then support educators? I want to talk for a few minutes about autonomy to practice, and I'll say more about that when we get to that slide. But it's incredibly important that people who view themselves, or who we want them to view themselves as professionals, that they have an opportunity to practice the profession, right? And make decisions about how they're going to implement this incredibly important work of teaching young children. And then just a way to think about organizational structure and opportunities for leadership. So let's dig into this a little more, and I'm going to pass the baton back to Amy to talk about HR practices.
Right. So I think, as Sharon mentioned, we're talking not just about educators, but of course, our educators are also employees, and all employees really appreciate clear expectations, clear and consistent communication, and they really demand and expect and want to be treated equitably with their peers. So, while it's really important for directors to support the content work of our educators, more fundamental even is their treatment of their educators as employees, right? So have I made clear in writing what is the job? Is it ECE1? Is it ECE2? Is it assistant teacher, lead teacher? How flexible do I need to be? What do I need to know? How am I going to be evaluated? All of these basics are really critical. They are foundational to how we determine if an educator, how someone feels secure in their job, how they feel comfortable, how they are able to relate to other educators that work with them. So having a really clear job description that is accurate, updated, that's been reviewed with the employee is a really important first step. Another piece of this is to have a performance evaluation tool that aligns with the job duties, the job description itself. We often talk about how, if something isn't measured, it doesn't exist, right? So we need to measure an employee's performance. It isn't a punitive process, it's a growth process. It's a way to support an educator in thinking about how she can continue to do better, how she can continue to do things differently, and also to acknowledge all that she does really well. So having a performance evaluation tool is really essential. And of course, using that tool is also essential. So sometimes I know, a standard might say, that there must be a tool, but it's totally different level of kind of, review to actually see, oh, when was the tool implemented, right? So ideally, someone who is on just hired, there would be a stated probationary period, and that probationary period would be sort of marked as either completed successfully or needing to continue on for a period of time based on a formal review that's completed. And then thereafter, an employee would be, get an annual review each year. So there's a formal process for actually evaluating someone's performance and supporting someone in improving and thanking someone and acknowledging all that they do well. But also, in most professions, that annual review is tied to increased compensation. And sometimes I think, again, in early childhood, where sometimes we're feeling apologetic about not being able to pay teachers better or to provide them with more benefits, sometimes a way of putting that under the rug, sweeping it under the rug is, not actually acknowledging the performance each year because there might not be monies available, or the director might not have done all the budgeting necessary, or, managed by the Iron Triangle, or gotten all the coaching that they needed so that they can actually afford an annual increase. We wish, we know that there are challenges in the business model that kind of cap revenue. So of course, a business owner is going to try to cap increases in their annual expenses, but the annual review can be completed without a direct tie to increase in compensation. And then the last piece that we really wanted to mention is sort of foundational to creating a work environment that where there are clear expectations, where there are, points for evaluation and for feedback. Essential to that is HR policies. And, we know that the most fundamental relationship between an employer and an employee is about documentation of time worked and payment for time worked. And so, there needs to be very clear policies around, clocking time and, working overtime if you're, non-exempt, and all of those other pieces that are so, they're typical for every field, they're important for every employee, and they're places where we often see in childcare because they are so many small businesses, and because oftentimes our owners and directors have kind of grown up in their own professional pathways from working in very small centers. So we don't see a lot of HR expertise in the field. So that really is a detriment in terms of creating that basic positive workplace environment of clear expectations, clear communication, and just really strong legal practices that are equitable.
So I want to note that there's some really good conversation going on in the chat. And we've got a lot of time sort of scheduled at the end here. We're, planning on 15 or 20 minutes of time for dialogue, either through chat or active live dialogue, questions and comments. So we see that your comments, and we really appreciate your engagement on this. So actually, there was a comment a minute or two ago about how we need professional supports, not just for teachers, but also for directors. And that's really kind of the point of this slide. I want to talk about that for a couple of minutes. We don't really have a strong history of most leaders in programs kind of practicing all of these issues around pedagogical leadership because of all of the constraints, right? Because the operations are so demanding, because of the chronic under-resourcing. Actually being able to practice the craft of pedagogical leadership is something that is kind of a luxury. So let's talk about what that means. Typically, if we use the term pedagogical leadership, we for sure are talking about how a program leader supports the teachers, how they help teachers find resources. They may assist with lesson planning. They may assist with through classroom coaching. But pedagogical leadership really encompasses more than that. And I know there are way too many words on this slide. I want to acknowledge that, but I kind of, I want you to have this quote because it's so rich and to just sort of be able to sit with it, right? So I underlined and bolded what I thought were these other key elements, and I want to just kind of call them out for a minute here. So in addition to supporting staff in the classroom, the pedagogical leader is really the one that sets the tone for across the whole program, right? And so that person creates the expectation and the culture in which there's a commitment to continuous quality improvement. Every day in every way, we want our staff to be curious about what's happening with children and to ask questions of themselves about how they might explore this further, or how they might, understand this child better or connect with a family further. So that striving for continuous quality improvement and fostering family engagement, right, which is so critical to how we fully support children's optimal development, is when we bring families into those conversations and into those practices, and when we are able to extend those ideas and those practices at home and with families. The program leader, part of pedagogical leadership is also this idea about fidelity to the organization's curricular philosophy, right? So what is it that is sort of the driving spirit behind the program? Is it a nature-based program? Is it a Reggio program? Is it Montessori? Is it, any high scope, or, what is the philosophy, the educational philosophy that undergirds what is going on in that program, and why the classrooms are set up the way they are, and why folks are doing the things that they're doing. And the pedagogical leader is really kind of the lighthouse, right, that keeps folks focused on those fundamental ideas. And then, gosh, I really love this data to evaluate the effectiveness of the learning program. In general, data is in short supply because we have the tendency in our field not to really use systems to gather data. Now, a lot of programs are really good at documenting, creating children's portfolios, and those are incredibly important tools. But when it comes to being able to pull data together, to aggregate it, to look across classrooms, to look across different characteristics within a program, having all of that data in paper form, we're really limited, right? So being able to have assessments in a digital format, having feedback, can give the program leader really the tools that they need to understand what's happening at a detailed level for the purpose of continuous quality improvement, right? For the purpose of understanding what's going well and where do we have opportunities for growth. And then meeting the standards for optimal learning environments. We are a very standard-rich field, whether it's your state quality improvement system or accreditation or environmental rating scales, you name it. We've got sets of standards and we can measure and do those kinds of things. So we want that's part of the job of the pedagogical leader. So as you can see, it's a lot more than just supporting teachers. And directors really need support in understanding, learning about these skills, and developing new practices to be able to move into this space. So in this slide, we're sort of shifting our attention now and thinking a little bit more granular about how the director supports the staff in this task of reflective practice. And so we talk about a pedagogical leader being a practicing reflective supervision in that they are supporting staff to be thoughtful practitioners. Right. And so what does it mean, this phrase, job embedded pedagogical leadership? What do we mean by that? Well, first of all, we're talking about professional development for staff that is less about going to a training and more about owning the learning goals yourself. I kind of like to think about it as developmentally appropriate pedagogy or professional development, right? It's because I'm engaging in professional development opportunities that speak to my learning needs and my learning goals. And they're appropriate for the level at which I'm kind of operating in the field, and for both my education and my skill and my experience level. My professional development will be appropriate to that. And it will be appropriate to my, my culture and my practices. So it'll be developmentally appropriate sort of across the spectrum. We are very workshop heavy in our sector, in our field. And we know that, I don't have the slide up here, but one of the slides that we often use is what the research tells us, that people forget about 90% of what they hear within a few hours of kind of hearing it. If you want folks to really internalize the professional development content, they need to not just hear it, but they need to have opportunities to practice it. And that's really what we're talking about here. So this reflective cycle, I'm sure that you've seen this before, but it's about planning, practicing, actually teaching, implementing the plan, thinking about how it went, analyzing what went well and how might we change it, adapt it, and then we start the cycle all over again. Being engaged in that reflective practice is so important because it allows the educator to really be responsible for their own learning. And that's what we mean by the ability to practice autonomy. It's just so critically important for folks to understand. If we want them to see themselves as a professional, we need to give opportunities for them to practice the profession. And these are, yes.
Oh, pardon me. We have such a good question from Rebecca in the chat, and it's just very pertinent to what you're speaking to.
Yep.
She's asking about state systems and whether those systems really do allow individual ownership and autonomy over PD choices. And
I think this is the dilemma, right? Like, I assume that you're probably thinking about, like, licensing says you have to have so many clock hours of training every year, and you have to have certain topics covered.
Licensing and quality rating.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we have to have objective measures, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with having those standards. I mean, I think it's better if you, I mean, there are some topics that, you got to go take a CPR training because you have to have those skill set, right? There are some topics that lend themselves just fine to a workshop setting. And, we just need to make sure that people have that content, right? But in terms of, going back to those standards a couple of slides ago, let's see if we can find them. Yeah, here. I mean, when you look at that content, you could easily see how you could, in a program, you could spend a few months doing a deep dive into any one of these. You could spend a year exploring any one of these topics, right? And spending time in that content is just something that I don't think lends itself very well to a lecture format that you might get in a workshop. So maybe the answer is both and. Maybe people need to, do those, attend workshops and do those as a minimum, but hopefully that's not the only professional development that they're getting. Does that make sense?
And we've got more chat and that's great feedback about different innovations in different places, Arizona, Montana. And, I do think that these systems are trying to be more flexible, trying to create minimum hours of professional development, really focus on credentials and degrees. And so, my suspicion is that we'll continue to see a ratcheting back as much as possible on the number of, just sort of generic PD hours, and this increased emphasis on degree, degree programs, degree enrollment, credential enrollment, and, really allowing educators to focus their time and which is obviously very limited in the areas that are most important to them as a professional.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's another issue that just came up, which is getting the state to recognize if you're doing job embedded coaching. I know that that's been an issue for a really long time. Like, how does the state know that what's going on in the program is actually really good, valid stuff that's happening, right? And so every state sort of has their own set of guidelines about what they will and won't approve. But I think, if we're bringing a professional rigor, if we're not talking about, having staff meetings where people are sitting around, talking about what makes them crazy and, a gripe session, right? We're talking about really rich content, pedagogical leadership. And so we need to be able to describe what that looks like, how we're implementing it, what are the learning goals. But I understand that can be, that can be a regulatory issue and maybe not easy to solve in a particular setting. Although it looks like folks in some states are saying, yeah, we've been really successful in having that happen. So that's encouraging. So I think we're getting close to sort of opening up for dialogue. There's one more point I want to hit, and that is this idea about shared leadership, sometimes called distributed leadership, right? It's looking at ways to give staff more opportunities to take on leadership, and opportunities for career advancement. And that can be incredibly important to a person's decision to stay over the long term in a program or in a particular position. We have a colleague in Georgia who did a workshop for us at the conference, who told her story about how there was a crisis at her center. She's the academy director for a program that has several different sites. And so she was kind of over all of those programs. And they had an incident happen, and she was not able to actually be on site for over 3 months. And it was a life-changing experience. And they were able to get through that period. But one of the things that happened was they had no choice. They had to start giving leadership tasks to other folks in the program. And through that experience, what happened was everybody's eyes sort of, opened wide, and they said, staff really liked being able to take on extra responsibility. Staff really appreciated being given new leadership opportunities and new tasks. And so they decided, after the director came back, that they were going to keep that and really organize it intentionally in that way. And so, again, thinking about ways to give more responsibility to members of your staff in a way that shares leadership and helps people see a pathway forward for them. I mean, one of the things that we talk about, honestly, in our field is that often folks come into a director position having been in the classroom, and they've really not had any specific training in administration or leadership and management. Well, here's an opportunity for folks to take on, for classroom teachers who are interested and show aptitude, to start to take on some more administrative responsibilities and begin to function with more visibility as a leader in the program. So again, something to think about in terms of how we support staff and how we create work environments that really excite people and really help them to be committed. I wanted to not leave this session without really calling out the factors that we think are really foundational to home-based childcare. What do we mean by a positive work environment in home-based childcare? So at a minimum, we're talking about compensation for a family childcare provider. The expectation is probably going to vary a great deal depending on where they live and what community they're in, but a compensation level that allows them to have a standard of living that feels comfortable, that feels right, that a living wage and beyond, right? Health insurance is fundamental and necessary. Retirement savings, really, really important that there is a way for the provider to be able to build that into their business plan and their budget, so that they can actually make a career out of this work. Access to substitutes, someone to come in and provide relief when they're either ill and not able to work, when they need to do professional development, and perhaps even when they need to take just time off for personal or vacation or whatever. And then that relates to work-life balance. One of the reasons that we're such big promoters at OpEx of technology is because we know that home-based providers work incredibly long hours, 70, 80 hours a week. And by using automation in their program to manage their program, they can really reduce the number of hours they have to spend working on their business, giving back some of that work-life balance. Access to the kind of professional development supports that we've been talking about here, being able to be involved in reflective practice, communities of practice, access to peer support, and then being able to access comprehensive services when they need, on behalf of children and families, when they need to tap into other resources in the community. And so then finally, we just want to kind of remind you that this is the power of shared services, right? That shared services can play an incredibly helpful role in creating these positive work environments in a number of ways. by freeing up time for the director to play that role. We've talked about that a lot. But in some shared service alliances, we actually see them taking on some of the pedagogical tasks as well. I remember talking with a couple of programs that were in a shared service network. They were so excited because they had a very small number of infant teachers, right? Each of the programs only had 1 or 2 classrooms of infants, which is pretty typical because infant care is so expensive. By being a part of the shared service network, they were able to create a community of practice for the infant teachers across the whole network. What that meant was now, instead of having 3 or 4 people to be able to share collegially, now they had this larger group, people who are bringing different experiences and different perspectives, and it gave them an opportunity for a much richer professional development experience. So the shared service network can really provide access to much wider bandwidth in terms of pedagogical leadership, professional development, reflective practice. And then, we talked a few minutes ago about how the director can probably use support in understanding how to grow as a pedagogical leader. Perfect opportunity in a shared service alliance for those directors to come together and to avail themselves of real intentional professional development about their work and their role as a pedagogical leader. And then standing up substitute pools. It's impossible to create a work environment where people are able to do reflective practice and really be deeply engaged in thinking about their work when they never get time off the floor, right? And a lot of times when we ask folks, do your teachers have paid planning time? A lot of programs answer yes, they do. But what they mean by that is, nap time, right? When the kids are sleeping, the teacher can, take her lesson plan book and write out lesson plans. That's really not what we mean. We mean real time away from the classroom and those responsibilities to be thoughtful and reflective and really engage in this important work. And so having substitutes or floaters or whatever they're called can really be a critical resource that a shared service alliance can provide. And I think we're at the resources page. So we've got really excellent dialogue going on. Amy, you've been monitoring chat. Why don't we take a few minutes and let people chime in, unmute themselves if they'd like to do that and have a conversation, and then we can finish up by pointing people to these resources that we've got up here. But you are welcome to start exploring these as well. So where should we start?
So I think, I was interested, Linda, I don't know if you're still on the call, but if you are, if you'd like to come off mute, and I was interested in this idea of that you mentioned about educators wanting flexible hours. And I was wanting to make sure that we all learned from that question.
Hi, I don't know if you can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
Great. No, I've just been, trying to listen as much as I can to these kinds of ideas and explore them with different people. And that work-life balance seems to be coming up a lot. And I didn't know if people were exploring, doing 4 longer days or, maybe letting them do their planning from home and get paid for it. Or, just I think we just need to be super creative and think out of the box and find what is going to, be inspiring and appealing to teachers.
I love those ideas. I really do. My mind is actually racing because I'm thinking, working 4 longer days and then having that sort of, a 3-day break, or maybe you get a day in the middle, right? I mean,
Yep.
this working with young children is both physically and emotionally taxing, exhausting, and being able to get some time, and being able to say what it is that I need, right? Because maybe my situation is different from yours. Or maybe I'd love to work with kids, but I really think I could only manage 25 or 30 hours a week. I love the idea about getting paid to work from home to do planning. It feels like we may be the only sector that, hasn't sort of embraced the work from home movement, but what a creative way to think about doing that. I love those. Feel free to jump in, folks. But you know what you need to do to unearth some of those ideas, I guess, is to do some creative brainstorming with your staff, right? Ask them, what do they think what would work for them? What would make their jobs more manageable? What would make them be able to feel more supported in their work?
And that, I think that that's one of the pieces that, an HR director, right? If you work in a large nonprofit organization or a large corporation, right? Your HR director is going to send a survey to you each year and ask you about what other benefits do you wish that you could be offered, or what other kinds of things would make your job better or easier, or make you more effective or more likely to stay, et cetera. So I think, that's a place where a shared service hub could support members in kind of creating that survey tool, fielding the survey, looking at the data. It's tough for a director of a small center to kind of take that initiative. And in the chaotic environment that we know, with call outs and, needing to have coverage in those classrooms every single moment, it's just the kind of thing that can kind of slip through the cracks.
Absolutely. Amy, you reminded me of what Kate Byrne is doing in Florida, right? They have, so our colleague Kate started a shared service alliance last year. And what's the number one struggle? Hiring people, keeping people, right? Staff. And so Kate actually engaged an HR firm, and they not only help the director think about the job description and the recruiting process, but they also, after probably 3 months, but after a short period of time, that HR person checks back in with a new hire and says, how are things going? What is going well about the job? What feedback do you have? And that's exactly what you were describing, Amy, right? Is having the resources, but there's something about having that sort of third party be able to have those conversations and bring the feedback back to the director that I think can be really helpful. I'm not saying that you don't have the conversation with your staff, but having an opportunity to give feedback in a way that doesn't feel like, wow, if I say this, I might, bring on some displeasure from my director, right? So I think multiple strategies are really what we need to be thinking about. Do we have multiple pathways for that feedback loop to happen?
Raquel from ELSA is actually.
Oh, there you go. Is actually from that Shared Service Alliance. Yeah.
Awesome. Is there anything you wanted to add, Raquel? Have you gotten feedback from your directors specific to the kinds of, the recruitment and kind of check back services that they've gotten?
I will share that where we have seen I would say a improvement in our efforts. And again, this is something that we have been piloting now for 1.5 years, but being able to have that partnership of experts that are continuously assessing what the market pay scale is, what are the qualifications of the candidates based on regions, communities, which make a big difference because, folks are responding to positions, but they might not be adequate candidates for a specific location. So
Mm.
that has been our competitive edge. And these recruiters not only screening based on minimum requirements, pay scales that the applicant is looking for, but diving into those pre-screening questions that best helps us identify fitability. Is that candidate a fit for that program? Then we quickly schedule them for an interview. We have the programs commit to specific days with different varying hours within those days to quickly schedule those candidates for interviews. The recruiters do maintain consistent communication with these candidates, reminding them of their interview, checking in the morning of, making sure that there's that that smooth transition to connecting them with the programs. The programs are reporting that they feel stronger about the candidates that they're seeing. They really see the effectiveness on the process that we have from screening all the way to hire and onboarding. Background screening is another area that we are supporting them. And then ultimately we are supporting them on the retention side. So the recruiters are conducting 30, 60, 90 retention check-in calls to ensure, again, that level of engagement and making sure that if there are any concerns within that timeline, that the providers are aware of it. They ask these questions in a very neutral setting. So that way the candidates feel comfortable in opening up and sharing if there's any areas of concern, any areas of opportunities, but also making sure that they're feeling very good about their experience, in those first 90 days. So yes, we are seeing a very positive outcome of that partnership and the efforts and the process that we have implemented.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. That's, it just speaks to the, how hard it is to carry this just on your own, right? And that there are ways to bring new resources to the table.
Yeah, I like the idea of outsourcing that too, because the directors are so swamped that sometimes checking in with that new staff member goes to the, back of the, or the bottom of your plate. So you're not getting that time. So if somebody is dedicated to doing that, I think that will be very helpful.
Right.
Sharon, as a follow-up question, I noticed that Lisa Tynan from Oregon put in the chat, with that firm work in Oregon. The question for me is can somebody talk about how you find a recruiter like that? And if Lisa wanted to do something like that in her part of the country, what should she do? What would be her next steps?
Well, so the folks in Florida are using Source 2, and I don't think they're a national firm, right? Do you happen to know, Amy or Raquel? Yeah, okay. So we can ask Kate. But Louise, what I would say is I would look in my community for I'm trying to think about what's the term, HR recruiting firms. What would it's not really a benefits broker, but there are, I often see advertisements for outsourced HR. And I think what you have to do is figure out who's in your community, pick up the phone and talk to people and figure out who would fit. I mean, I think that's one of the things that a shared service alliance can really help do is go through a vetting process and find a firm that is kind of committed to the mission and to supporting the mission. This isn't going to be a really lucrative gig, right? I mean, people will get paid for the services, but it's not going to be it's not a high wealth industry. So you have to find a good match, I think, and what Kate has told us is that they have one person in the firm who's dedicated to work with their folks. And so she's sort of developed a suite of tools that she knows will work for this sector and what she needs to look for. And I think you sort of have to curate the resources in your community. Other people have ideas or thoughts?
So Evie commented if the HR education department in colleges could give some guidance on what firms are in the area. I mean, I think that there, part of the challenge is that there are a lot of like temporary staffing agencies out there that are very expensive. They'll give childcare centers, temporary staff working a day here, a week there, et cetera, that meet all the basic requirements, but don't really do the, the other pieces, really determining what salary scale should be and supporting a director around what their benefit package might look like, checking back in with a new employee, et cetera. So I think, there are companies that do bits and pieces, and what we've been so impressed with is that this company that they've used in Florida, which Raquel said is national, and I put the website, their website in the chat, that they seem to do it all. And let's see, Ty is talking about
Early Learning Ventures, building this service out.
right.
And Ty, thank you for putting your contact information in the chat, if anybody wants to copy that.
I mean, I know in Philadelphia, we have a large NACE accredited center that is actually with philanthropic support trying to create, trying to recruit new educators to the field and place those educators in centers that sort of meet a minimum standard of HR practices. So, it's grant funded, so it isn't necessarily sustainable, but, it is kind of along the lines of what we're talking about here. You can recruit and recruit and recruit and just have constant turnover if the job itself isn't clear, if the workplace isn't conducive to the kinds of expectations that a professional would have. Let's see.
Yeah, and that there is an association of human resource professionals, right? SHRM, Society of Human Resource and Management, something. That might be another place to just look for. If you went to their website, I would imagine that they would have the names of firms and individuals who specialize in this. And then, there's also different tasks, right, in HR, right? When earlier in the presentation, we were talking about HR practices kind of in an ongoing way, making sure that you've got good policies, making sure that you're implementing those practices consistently. And that's not exactly the work of recruiting, right? And so you might find all of that in one place, but you may want to, focus in on one. I think what they're doing in Florida, I think what Elsa is doing is really focusing on the recruitment and, good placement of staff. So anyway, and, some shared service alliances that are housed at a large central agency that has an HR department is able to use those HR services. I'm thinking of Chambliss Children's Center, right? It's a large human service organization. They have 8 or 10 childcare programs that partner with them. Their HR department in that organization is able to provide HR services to each of the member sites because they have that capacity by virtue of their size and, the sheer size of their staff. It's another model. Amy, why don't we talk to people about the resources that are up on the screen and kind of share a little bit about what folks can find in these various places?
Sure. And I did want to note, early day, we've Opportunities Exchange, we've checked in with them a couple of times and, tried to grab hold of exactly what they're offering. And I think somebody was out on maternity leave and we haven't had the chance to check in recently, but it seems like they are not uniformly available across the country. So let's see, and we'll come back to Kaylee's question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Kaylee or Callie, why don't you email either Amy or me after this, and we will, you can find our contact on the website and we can follow up with you more individually about where to access those. Sorry, go ahead, Amy.
No worries. So this first set, ECE Shared Resources, is the platform, ECE platform that is sort of populated and offered by CCA for Social Good. It's in about 36 states at this point, and just offers a lot of resources that we've mentioned here today, right? So these are templates. They are not, it really varies how specific to each state they might be. We know HR, again, it's legalistic. It's got the, federal law, it's got state law, there may be local laws. Our fair city in Philadelphia has multiple employment laws, access to breastfeeding, locations and paid sick leave. So, the ECE Shared Resources may offer, some basic starting point that is nationally legal, doesn't necessarily protect you from, any differences that may be state or local, but it's got great resources, templates for job descriptions, performance reviews, a whole slew of resources that may be available to providers free of charge in your state, again, depending on who holds the license for that resource. We also have created some resources at Opportunities Exchange. Those are available free to any and all, really directed to intermediaries like a Shared Service Alliance hub, but also can be used by providers themselves. We really focus on financial management, but embedded within that are HR practices. So, and we've got an issue brief around ECE workforce that's coming out that really sort of summarizes our thinking from these 3 webinars, and we hope you'll find that beneficial. And then we often speak to the resources available through our friends at Civitas Strategies, who do a lot of work in creating business tools and offering business training and coaching specific to early childhood, both centers and family child care providers. They are the people who have taken on Tom Copeland's huge cache of articles and information, and they continue to answer provider questions about taxes and finances. They too speak to HR, mostly in terms of, setting compensation, recruiting and hiring. And those resources are available on the Civitas website. If Civitas works in your state, specifically Virginia, Indiana, Texas, there may be others I'm forgetting. Wisconsin has done some work with Civitas. You may have other ways to access those resources, and they may be specific to your state, but they do offer something there as well. And
Great.
I know people, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know people have had to jump off. We've got 6 minutes left. I had one question for folks if there was appetite to keep the conversation going. And it was, I know Linda's idea about offering educators the opportunity to be paid for planning that they might complete at home kind of triggered for me an idea that Sharon and I had been talking about in terms of continuing to create opportunities to professionalize the field and treat our educators as the experts, the content experts and professionals that they are. And one aspect of that, we didn't really touch on it today, but I wonder about is that data and using automated tools, using assessment tools to inform practice and engage in conversation with parents, and just the whole, what are the pedagogical tools that are tied to automation, and how do we view that in the whole landscape of creating a positive workplace environment?
So I've shared this story, and please, anyone jump in. I don't think that this wasn't a question just for me, but I'll kick it off. I've shared this story in other places where a director told the story about how she resisted in bringing technology into her program for a long time, because technology is more screens, and we don't need more screens in our lives, we need less. But during the pandemic, she realized that there were just a lot of ways in which technology would be really helpful. So they selected a childcare management system, which has a parent engagement function, and her teachers started sharing pictures and videos and basically documentation about what was happening with the kids in the classroom. And she said it radically changed how parents understood the role of those classroom teachers, that they really began to get that what was happening in the classroom wasn't about watching kids all day, but it was about engaging kids in thoughtful, engaging activities in which kids were learning and growing and developing. And it started those conversations. And so it was not only good for kids and parents, but it really helped confirm her teachers' self-perception as teachers, and they've made a real institutional choice that they will call all of their staff early childhood educators and teachers, and they've just really sort of cultivated that. But technology gave them that opportunity to kind of flip the script, if you will.
And yeah, I think that that's an area, if you all are finding in your region, again, at Opportunities Exchange, we tend to talk about the CCMS as automation for business leadership and for business practices and administrative practices. But we're really interested in hearing from the field about, how these tools really change and impact the workplace for educators in general. As professionals, I would think they would be truly intrigued and excited by the ability to have data and to look at data, to analyze that data, use that data to differentiate instruction and all of the other great stuff that they've learned in their teacher preparation program. So it seems like, not that every CCMS has, is tied or includes assessment tools, but, more and more we're moving in that direction.
So it's about time for us to call it a wrap. I wanted to just share, sort of bring all of this kind of full circle, and say that the reason that OpX decided to plan and hold this series on workforce really grew out of the ideas that Louise Stoney shared at our conference when she did the closing keynote about, really having an impact, and is our work having an impact? So we've been talking for a long time about the power of shared services, but as a field, we know that we are in a crisis moment like we have never been before, and it's really around workforce. And as we did reflection ourselves, we really began to understand that shared services, in fact, is a really useful strategy for addressing these issues. And, in our field, and actually this issue brief that's coming out sort of hammers on 2 points, which is that we have had a tendency as a field to really think that all of the answers to our dilemma, to our challenges, are found sort of outside of our programs, right? Like if we could get more public investment, if we could get policies, we absolutely need greater public investment. We need more money to underwrite the cost of this service. But we also need to change the way that we do business. We think shared services offers a really helpful strategy. Automation offers really helpful resources. But there are many, many things that we can do that we have tried to talk about in these sessions to raise wages, to get benefits for staff, and to create working conditions that really support and enable providers to do their very best work. And so that's kind of, where this is coming from, and why we've kind of bitten off this really big piece of the work. We hope that it's been helpful. Louise, do you want to offer any parting words as we sort of wind down the calendar year and this year of work for OpEx?
Nope, except I just think this has been a great series. Kudos to you, Sharon and Amy, for doing it. I feel like it's really important for providers to step into a leadership role here and say, what do we need to do in our businesses? Because there's a public policy arm, but there's also a provider role that really needs to be front and center.
Yeah. And Amy, thank you so much for being my partner in crime in this planning. lot of late nights, hard thinking about what the right message needed to be. But hopefully we've shared a few things that will give you new ideas and new places to go as we kind of walk through this really difficult time together.
I would also encourage people that listen to all of this to stay in touch. We learn from you, and we're all in this together. So, feel free to share your ideas, reach out, use our website, suggest things. That's how we're going to grow this movement.
Absolutely. So be in touch. If you had questions or follow up, just email Amy or me or both of us, and we will send you the recording in a day or two, and also a PDF of the slide deck so that you'll have all of those links. Thanks everybody so much for being a part of this. And thank you for everything that you do for children and families and the folks who work in this field. We are really grateful. We know how important it is.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.